I don't have to tell this committee, I know, but California has faced, frankly, a shortage of judges for decades. In some areas of this state, not only is the shortage critical, but it borders on a social justice issue. Those with resources can afford to hire private judges to hear their disputes. Those without resources cannot. This legislature, as you know, in 2007, authorized 50 new trial judge positions throughout the state. Unfortunately, today, 8 years later, not one single judge position has been funded. SB 229, as amended, begins the process to fix this situation by providing for an appropriation of $10 million to fund 6 of the 50 trial judge positions that were authorized by the legislature in 2007. The allocation of the positions will be in accordance with the Judicial Council Needs Assessment that was published in 2014. With a statewide need of somewhere close to 270 judges, if adopted, this Senate bill will begin the long road to addressing this critical judge shortage in the state of California. So with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote, and I'm available to answer any questions, sir.
Thank you. Your witnesses in support?
Members, good morning. Alan Hertzfeld on behalf of the Judicial Council sponsors of the bill. Happy to answer any technical questions and request your aye vote when the committee is fully in session.
Mr. Chair, Chris McKaylee on behalf of the Civil Justice Association of California, and just like to make the point that former Chief Justice Ron George said, which is the right to a fair hearing is an empty promise if there's no one there to preside over the courtroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support, please.
Jennifer Burr on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, also in support.
Thank you.
Anthony Newman on behalf of the County of San Bernardino in support.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee. And thank you for bringing this forward. It was disappointing we weren't able to solve this in the budget this year. I think the legislature certainly tried, but I appreciate that you're bringing this bill. Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, well, I'll just add, thank you for the bill. The whole committee gets it. I think the whole legislature gets it. You've identified the two-tier problem, which is absolutely a very real thing out there that needs to be addressed. And the flip side of that is also occurring, for lack of anything better to call it, a zero tier. If you can't get a hearing, if you can't get your domestic violence case heard, if you can't get, you pick the matter, we are failing our constituents, and you've identified it. Kudos. I'm fully in support, and I hope we can get this done. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Senator Roth, you may close.
Respectfully ask for an aye vote, and I want to thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you. Thank you. The motion is due pass to appropriations. We will establish a quorum, then we'll be able to take a motion. So if you just call for a quorum.
Stone.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Alejo. Chow.
Here.
Chu. Gallagher. Garcia. Holden. Mainshine.
Here.
O'Donnell.
We do have a quorum, so I'll take a motion. The motion is due pass to appropriations. Moved by Mr. Wagner. Do you have a second? Second by Mr. Chow. Call the roll, please.
Stone.
Aye.
Stone, aye. Wagner.
Aye.
Wagner, aye. Alejo. Chow.
Aye.
Chow, aye. Chu. Gallagher. Garcia. Holden.
Aye.
Holden, aye. Mainshine.
Aye.
Mainshine, aye. O'Donnell.
Aye.
O'Donnell, aye.
That bill is out. Thank you, Senator. All right. I think that brings us now to item number 5. Senator Nguyen. This is SJR 5.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Stone and Vice Chairman Wagner and members. SJR 5 urges the United States government to reauthorize the Humanitarians Resettlement Program to include disabled veterans of the South Vietnamese Army and their families. After the end of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War, the United Nations High Commission on Refugees established the Orderly Departure program to assist refugees fleeing Vietnam. Between 1979 and 1994, approximately 1 million Vietnamese applied through this program, with a majority relocating to the United States. The United States and the government of Vietnam later established the Humanitarian Resettlement Program, which accepted refugees' application between 2005 and 2008. These programs were open to Vietnamese closely associated to the United States during its presence in Vietnam, or to individuals that were interned in re-education centers for their actions against the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Due to my close personal connections to the stories of these refugees, I'm extremely grateful for the actions taken by the United States Department and international organizations that established these programs to ease international tensions typically related to a mass exodus. Unfortunately, some disabled veterans of the South Vietnamese Army became ineligible from participating in these programs because they did not spend the required length of time in re-education centers. Nonetheless, they have remained under political and religious prosecution for the past 40 years for their actions against the communist government because they were allies to the United States. SJR 5 seeks to resolve this issue by calling for the reauthorization of these resettlement programs to include these disabled veterans that have continued to suffer. It is only right to give aid and protection to allies that fought alongside the United States Armed Forces. In closing, I respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Do you have any witnesses in support?
No, not today.
No. All right. Was there anyone who would like to speak in support? Is there anyone in opposition? All right. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee. We do have a motion, and we have a second. No questions or comments from the committees? Senator, you may close.
I just respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Call the roll, please. And the motion is that this resolution be adopted.
Stone?
Aye.
Stone, aye. Wagner?
Aye.
Wagner, aye. Alejo? Chow?
Aye.
Chow, aye. Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Gallagher? Garcia? Holden?
Aye.
Holden, aye. Mainshine?
Aye.
Mainshine, aye. O'Donnell?
Aye.
O'Donnell, aye.
The resolution is out. Thank you. That brings us to item number 4, Senator Leno, which is SB 682. Good morning.
As you likely know, in all operations of state government here in California, we require some due diligence standards to be met before operations of that department or agency can be privatized. Currently, trial courts are exempt from this requirement. All this bill does is make sure that limited judicial resources are used most effectively by requiring an accurate analysis of costs and of savings before critical court functions are privatized. This is a phenomenon that we've seen happening more and more, and given the critical aspects and the important information that many of these employees of the courts handle, there's a sensitivity that we should be concerned about. Trial courts, I would make the case, should be held to at least the same standards as all the other operations of state government. So this does not ban the opportunity to contract out, but it does set a standard before trial courts can do so. So the bill would require the following: that there be a fair cost analysis, proven savings to the taxpayer, competitive bidding, disclosures on part of the contractor, no displacement of employees, and performance and financial audits. We've also put significant exemptions in the bill, working with the court to listen to some of their concerns. So, for example, if a service is highly specialized or technical, there'd be an exemption. If the contract is necessary to avoid any conflicts of interest, again, it would be exempted. In an emergency situation, there would be no requirement to follow these standards. And also for temporary or occasional services, another exemption. So, again, the bill is not to infringe upon the independent discretion of the trial courts, but just to ensure that our trial courts meet the same common sense standards when contracting out for services that we already require of all other governmental operations. And I was asked for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator. And there are amendments. The recommended motion is do pass as amended.
Yes.
So you're accepting the amendments that are addressed in the
That is correct.
Great. Thank you. So your first witness in support.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Michelle Castro, the Service Employees International Union. When the trial courts were a part of the county system, they were a part of all of the kind of good government requirements that applied to the counties. But when we reformed the law in 1997 and they came out from underneath the county structures, many of those good government reforms did not follow along with the courts. Open meetings, Public Records Acts, standards when you contract out. Since that time, the legislature has been systematically putting those kind of standards back in place. So this bill really is a logical extension of that work to ensure that trial courts are held to high standards of accountability and transparency. As Mr. Leno said, this bill doesn't prohibit privatization. It just says, please do your due diligence to make sure that this is in the public's best interest and it's going to actually save us money. We ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Libby Sanchez on behalf of Laborers Local 777 and 792, also one of the co-sponsors of this. As the analysis pointed out, every other state and public sector entity has some sort of privatization protocols that are in place. But for the courts and the state government, for example, their protocols are even more stringent than those outlined in this carefully developed bill, which contains also, as the analysis point out, 11 exemptions for situations where contracting out doesn't have to meet the protocols required in this bill. All of us representing court employees over the last several years have experienced serious problems when contracting out has occurred in our courts, but no protocols have been adhered to. One brief example I want to share with you is a situation in Riverside County where one of my courts contracted out in the face of laying off clerks that would otherwise deal with the public, and instead contracted out to replace these with kiosks. These kiosks were English-speaking only in a predominantly Spanish-speaking area. So they were completely useless and had to be revised and replaced, to the detriment not only of the public that they were intended to serve, but to the court coffers. For these and so many other reasons, we respectfully request your aye vote on this measure.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Brian Allison on behalf of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, also in support, also pleased to be a co-sponsor of this bill. And on behalf of the trial court employees that we represent, we'd like to take this time to thank the author for bringing forth as a prudent and common sense bill to address issues with respect to due diligence standards and contracting out in trial courts. As my colleagues have mentioned before, when the courts were on the county level, the standards restricting contracting out were much more stringent than those outlined in this bill. We join hands and work with the AOC and with the judicial branch in asking for more money, and with the legislature to ask for more money to restore the trial court services that were cut during the recession at the beginning of every year. And, you know, one of the things we believe is most prudent to taxpayers in this state is to make sure that we have the same or similar levels of due diligence standards that don't prevent contracting out, but just make sure that we're doing it in a prudent, judicious fashion that protects the interests of not only our employees, but the taxpayer dollars that we expend here in the legislature, but, you know, as, you know, those who are responsible for doing the will of the people here in this state. So we want to make sure that we're protecting the services that our members provide, but we also want to make sure we're making the most judicious use of taxpayer dollars. So for those reasons and for the ones articulated by my colleagues, I'd like to ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Next witness.
Mr. Chair, members, Randy Perry with Aaron Reed and Associates on behalf of the Orange County Employees Association in strong support of the bill.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? Give your name, affiliation, and your support.
Morgan Carvajal with the Hernandez Strategy Group on behalf of the California Court Reporters Association, also in support.
Michael Young, California Labor Federation, also here in support.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? Seeing none. Anyone in opposition? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Marcia Slough. I'm the chair of the Trial Court Presiding Judges Advisory Committee. I'm the presiding judge of San Bernardino County. I just want to speak on behalf right now of San Bernardino County. This bill impacts all 58 counties. The courts, I will affirmatively state to you, there is not a presiding judge in this state that wants to operate its courts on the backs of a contract. The reality is we have spent years and years living through the Great Recession, as have all the other agencies and departments that have suffered through the cuts. We were asked and called for by this body to get efficient. And what I will affirmatively state, this bill, as presently written, in all due respect to Senator Leno, who I have the utmost respect for, hamstrings us. One example, in the bill as it presently exists, San Bernardino County Court contracts with San Bernardino County to process thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of mail every single day. However, San Bernardino County contracts with someone to do that work. The bill as presently written would prevent that, which means the court would need to take up that work, which means we would have to either hire staff to do that work, which we don't have the funding to do, or pull staff away from providing very important services to the people that we are charged to serve. That's one example. We also have examples of technology that we are using that we cannot use because it does not have a technology exception. Our scanning of materials so that we can become much more efficient, we would not be able to do because we do some scanning with employees and some scanning with contractors. One of the greatest impediments of this bill, and I've had conversation with the Senator, and again, I say affirmatively and declaratively that I respect him and trust his word. However, the way the bill is presently written, particularly with the inclusion of customarily performed, leaves the bill so vague and ambiguous as to not be able to tell what you can and cannot contract out for. I respect the fact and appreciate the fact that Senator Leno modified the language relating to renewals and extensions. However, that is a distinction without a difference as long as the language of customarily remains undefined and or within this bill. We would ask for a specific declarative affirmative statement that this bill does not reach back to prior contracts. We've also submitted a list of 5 changes that we think are really critical to the success of this bill. I heard Ms. Castro speak about some of the concerns about the contracting out of the courts. The court does have the judicial branch contracting laws, and quite frankly, some of the wording within this bill directly conflicts with some of the laws that we're already obligated to follow. That will create uncertainty. That will create unsure courts all up and down and across the state of how do we enter into a contract, and if we cannot enter into a contract, did we guess right or did we guess wrong when it comes to the language of this bill? And if we guessed right, good on us, and if not, then now we got to back up and do it differently. Because I will say that I firmly believe the disruption and the effort and the energies that are going to have to be implemented within each county court system to assure that it is complying with the law will create a lot of obstacles for us. Finally, my last comment is, as you all know, I think you all know, San Bernardino County had to close a lot of courts during the Great Recession in order to continue to operate. I would love nothing more in my last 6 months as presiding judge for a county that has suffered so drastically, and I understand that previously you heard the judgeship bill, I would love nothing more than to provide some services to our remote areas in our mountain region and in the regions of our county that people now have to drive literally hours and hours just to get self-help. With this bill, I fear I cannot do that. So I would ask that we really seriously consider some of the changes that we have proposed and or oppose the bill as presently written. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Mary Beth Todd. I'm the Court Executive Officer with the Sutter Superior Court and also the Chair of the Court Executive Advisory Committee. I don't want to repeat everything that Judge Sal said. I'll just emphasize some of the points that the court executive officers have been talking about. We can sit here today and tell you that this will not make us more efficient. Absent the grandfather clause, this could serve to dismantle existing contracts that we have in place that we recognize during the period of economic downturn where our employees who are so precious to us were spending their skilled labor time performing redundant tasks. And so we've pulled some of those redundant tasks off as we couldn't replace employees, and we contracted with firms such as the mail processing, the scanning, where the firms have not only labor but primarily equipment, big, heavy equipment that can run through millions and millions of documents that just aren't feasible for us to purchase locally. But because we also have employees who also do that on a much smaller scale, it brings into play the issue of we would have to take our more skilled labor and either have them come back and start performing those redundant tasks, taking them away from assisting the public at the counter, from assisting the judges in the courtroom, from providing direct services to the public. Our concern with the absent the grandfather clause, it would serve to dismantle those contracts. It would make us less efficient. It would be much more difficult going forward to continue to, try to restore some of the services that we've all had to pull back on. And we just ask that the author continue to take into consideration the requests that we've made to make this more livable. We're not saying hell no. We're not saying hell no to the whole thing. We're just saying we need to make it so it doesn't unravel and dismantle the efficiencies that we currently have. Currently, these efficiencies are not being done at with the loss of employees. It's to supplement and augment the employees. We heard about jury kiosks earlier. That was not done at the expense of employees. We put in kiosks, employees lost their job. It was to augment the employees that are in place, which we all have to acknowledge aren't enough. We just don't have the funding to provide the full level of services that we used to be able to provide. So we've gotten more efficient. We've looked to technology, and we just need to make sure that we don't lose those efficiencies, because if we lose those efficiencies, it's going to be at the expense of the public that we serve.
Thank you. Next witness, please.
Mr. Chair, Corey Jasperson on behalf of the Judicial Council. Happy to answer if there are any technical questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition?
On behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce, also in opposition.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Rick Feldstein, Napa Superior Court Court Executive Officer, in opposition for all the reasons that were previously mentioned.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee. Mr. Wagner?
I'll take a run at this. Yeah, I find myself in no way surprised that the Cal Chamber is opposing a contracting out bill. But there are some folks here who are not historically, on the other side or skeptical of SEIU or asks me or any of those folks. And, we heard from the presiding judge. We got a letter from the LA Superior Court saying, quote, this would limit the court's flexibility to manage its resources precisely at a time when such flexibility is most critically needed. We got the Judicial Council opposing it because of its estimated $10 to $15 million cost to the courts to comply. In their letter, they call it an impossible balance that we're attempting to achieve. Those are legitimate concerns, and to my mind anyway, and the opposition with its amendments raises some good points. So maybe this is a softball, maybe this is a fastball, but what's your answer to what do seem like significant concerns that aren't just, there goes the chamber again, there go the Republicans again, opposing labor?
Well, first of all, I probably have been one of the more vocal advocates for restoring funding to the courts. They're doing the Lord's work on a shoestring, and it's unfortunate that we have a governor currently who's a bit resistant to reinvesting the necessary funds for court operations. But this, with all due respect, I think opposition doth protest just a bit too much. We're asking no more of them in terms of accountability and transparency than all other state governmental operations. And as Ms. Castro pointed out earlier, these are the same provisions by which the courts operated before we made the change a few years ago. So it can be done. With regard to some of the judge's concerns, the mention of technical expertise or specific equipment, we've got an exemption for highly specialized or technical aspects of the work. And this is not retroactive. We took amendments that make it just prospective. So it only applies to new contracts or services currently or, as the judge said, customarily performed. We've been meeting with the opposition for many months now. We'll continue to do so. If we need to work on the definition of customarily, but we can't define it in a way that is just a gaping loophole. And that's where we're trying to find some wording. But otherwise, this is completely prospective, does not impact existing contracts. It respects existing contracts. So again, with our long list of exemptions, we're not prohibiting anything and just suggesting that this protocol and standards that other governmental operations abide by is appropriate for the courts as well.
Okay. Well, all right, let me just try this. Might I ask the opposition, does that satisfy you?
It always satisfies me to hear Senator Leno that he wants to continue working together, because I take him at heart and I trust that and believe that, and I will state to you that we do as well. May I give you one example?
But let me actually, because that's not quite what I was getting at, and I apologize. Maybe I wasn't clear, and then I'll let you get to your example. But he was not only saying, I will continue to work with you, he was saying, your concerns are misplaced, it's prospective only, there are the exemptions for the technical tasks and big equipment. Yes, no, maybe?
All of the above, I don't know.
Okay.
The problem is, let me give you an example at home. In San Bernardino County, we have now only 6 different court locations, some of them very large and some of them very small, two judge courts. In some of our smaller courts, staff does some of the work, like sending out juror notices and that type of thing, that in the large courts we contract out for, because the amount of the work is just too great. So when that contract comes up, can I renew it? Because I have people within my own county that are performing that work, and I don't know. And that's where I think if we can get to a declarative statement that says this doesn't reach back, and if it doesn't and you mean it, can we just say it? Can we continue to work on a definition of customary? And I believe, Senator, that we can. That's just one example. I still am concerned about the technology piece and portion. I have soft file and others, yes. And maybe they can point me to the specific change that I have overlooked. We presented a document that had, I think, 7 or 8 different distinctions between the present bill and other bills that impact other governmental agencies. And I'm happy to spend some time looking for the technology one and respond to it. I just don't know where that change occurred, if indeed it did.
Well, let me step a little bit into that, and because I've been talking to my courts as well on this issue, and we do appreciate how efficient the trial courts are working given the limited resources. And I think this committee and most of us have definitely stood up for increased trial court funding with a clear understanding of who actually in the state of California is being hurt by that lack of funding. But yet, across the spectrum with public agencies, we do implement public policy through our budgetary decisions. And part of California's public policy is to ensure a strong and vibrant workforce, and that workforce is performing the tasks that traditionally are governmental. And I think that's one of the things that is a thread running through here. Interestingly, in talking to my courts about this, the word that sort of customarily performed, because they took me through a number of contracts that they currently have and have done for a while. They do not want to, in the name of efficiency, they do not want to have to change how they're doing business because of this bill. I don't believe this bill changes how they do business because of that statement of customarily. It is what they are currently doing. It is up to the trial courts themselves to decide what they're going to be contracting out, and having a conversation with their employees is the right way to do that. That's really where it gets settled. And if you look at the very first section, it is specific to that particular trial court, or that the word is that trial court, customarily performed in that trial court. So it doesn't look at, Riverside's not going to have to look at what Santa Cruz County does or what Los Angeles does. It's going to look at what Riverside County has done and what relationship it has with its employees, who's doing what. I think that's the flexibility that's really in here. And on page 4 of the bill, and let me find this again, there's an exemption that says the services contracted for cannot be satisfactorily performed by trial court employees or are of such a highly specialized or technical nature that the necessary expert knowledge, experience, and ability cannot be obtained from the trial court employees. And so I think that where there is specialty equipment, capital investment, where there is a particular expertise at processing one thing or another, you have the ability for the court to say, this is the kind of work that we have been contracting out, we need to contract out, working within the framework of the bill. I think it gives quite a bit of flexibility. I think it gives a nod to how the court currently is structured. And I think that's why this is a good bill and appropriate, and brings the judicial system more in line with the rest of the state agencies with respect to this notion that we're going to protect employees and not unduly contract out. Because again, that underlying public policy of ensuring the strength of the workforce.
And I understand that, sir. I guess my question would be,
and that's not, that was a statement, yeah, not a question. So I'm going to go to other members of the committee if anyone else would like to
I'm used to court.
Mr. Alejo.
Thank you. I was a co-author of the 2 previous versions of this bill by the former chairman of this committee, now Senator Wachowski. This made it to the governor in 2013. It was held in Senate Appropriations last year. But in 2013, the governor raised some concerns. So I'm just trying to see how we address those as this bill moves forward. He had mentioned in his veto message that the requirements were I guess overly restrictive, and so he had some concerns whether it would tie the hands of the court. What's different between this bill and that bill to address the governor's concerns? Because that's what, if this bill has the support of the legislature, we want to make sure we're addressing those concerns at the end of the process.
Mr. Alejo, I'll go ahead and address that. You're correct. That bill was vetoed. Last year, when we were moving AB 2332 along, we met and spent a lot of time with the administration and settled on a pathway for a signature. What the governor and his staff would like to see is the bill more aligned with Government Code Section 19130, which this bill does do. It is constructed differently. AB 566 was modeled after the library privatization bill that had passed in 2011. We thought that was a good model since the governor had signed that bill, but he said not so. That was appropriate for the courts. I want to go in a different, appropriate for the libraries, want to go a different way with the trial courts. The other issue, there were 2 issues that were of particular concern, is AB 566 had some additional requirements for contracts of $100,000 and above. That is not in this bill. Also, that bill had a definition of customarily that the Senate asked for that the governor felt went too far. So customarily does have a meaning. It has a meaning in the Constitution and with case law and the civil service statutes. It does have a meaning. the question is, what is the appropriate definition for the trial courts that the administration feels is appropriate, because they use and live under the term customarily and with their contracting law. And we know hundreds of millions of dollars worth of work still gets contracted out each year. So we have been meeting with them. We've revised this bill. It's constructed differently. Concerns that they had about additional performance audits, things like that, additional reporting requirements, all those things have been removed from the bill, and it is more aligned with 19130 with appropriate exceptions for the judicial branch. So we think that we have a winning bill here.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Mr. Gallagher?
I just observing, bills get called a lot of things, throughout the legislative process that I don't think are always exceptionally helpful. But I would call this the most interesting bill of the session because it kind of forces the majority party to make a choice between things that it says it cares about. We know that our courts are underfunded. I think we admitted that in the budget discussions that we were having last week, that we still haven't gotten there. This bill is going to make it harder for them to do their jobs with the limited funding that we know that we've already admitted that they have, and so, but it helps public employee unions who are responsible for contributions, significant contributions. So that's why I label this an interesting bill. What's the choice going to be? Is it going to be the more intangible but fundamental things that we all care about, justice and equality? Or is it going to be the more tangible contributions that win? In this
Mr. Gallagher, is that really where you want to go in this building?
Well, I'm just saying what I think. And I think it does go there because you just heard from the courts who are coming here and who have written, each and every one of us, a very detailed letter on how this hampers their ability to do their job.
I was referring to the campaign contribution comment.
Well, I don't think I'm saying anything that is not obvious to everyone in the state.
Well, if you're going to raise that specter and color a policy.
But I think that is the tough decision. I think it's something that we should very much be thinking about. And we're the Judiciary Committee. We're overseeing judicial policy. And I don't see any other reason for this bill, than to protect public employee unions. It's the only reason this bill is being proposed, and to hamper the ability of courts to contract out for personal services. And I think we need to really think about that, especially when we all admit we've given the courts a very limited budget going forward. So I'll be voting no. It's the easy choice for me. But let's see. Let's vote.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Holden?
I'm sorry.
And I'm happy to give the floor to the senator, but let me just comment. I have to comment on the last speaker's assertions because I think it's easy to say. We can all say that about positions that you take and who supports you. And I think that it demeans this body and what we're trying to get to in terms of smart, reasonable, and appropriate legislation. You may not agree with it, but to take a personal attack against your colleagues is completely unacceptable, number one. Number two, we all support the courts. It's been stated. We went to bat. We are not the governor. We don't have the blue pen. And if we had been able to get through what we wanted to, then the courts would have more money, would have more resources. Everybody would have more resources, not just the courts. And so to the extent that we are trying to present a strong front to a lot of different services that impact on constituents throughout the state, we did not get everything we wanted. Those departments still have to tighten their belts as well. We prefer that they not have to tighten them as much as they have turned out to have to do. Just like we would prefer the courts not to have to tighten their belts as tough as they're going to have to do. But all oars in the water. And I think that certainly the presiding judge made a very compelling case on circumstances that we already understand, and our hearts go out and we feel it. But at the same time, we're trying to find the right way to do it and create the right balance. There are 11 exemptions to this bill that I think create appropriateness in terms of looking at circumstances and allowing the courts to have an exemption. And so I think that it's a bill worth supporting, and I'm happy to do so.